The Nativity account that's in the Gospel of Luke not only contradicts the account in the Gospel of Matthew, it also contradicts itself. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and in Luke chapter 1, the narrator explains that the story of the conception of John the Baptist begins in the days of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BCE. So at the very least, John the Baptist was conceived before or right around the time of Herod the Great's death in 4 BCE. It then goes on to explain that Elizabeth was pregnant with John the Baptist while Mary was pregnant with Jesus. The two pregnant women interact. It's a famous story. But in Luke chapter 2, the narrator needs to get Joseph and Mary down to Bethlehem so Jesus can be born in Bethlehem in fulfillment of prophecy. And the mechanism for making that happen is a census that required Joseph return to his ancestral hometown to register. And it explains that this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was ruling in Syria. Now, Quirinius was ruling in Syria and did oversee a census of Judea in 6 CE, 10 years after the death of Herod the Great. And there's a good reason for this census, because that's when Rome took over direct rule of Judea and needed to conduct a census to find out how many people were living there, where they lived, what they did, because they had just deposed Herod Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great, who had been ruling as a tetrarch in Judea ever since the death of his father Herod the Great. So this is the first opportunity and reason for Rome to conduct a census in Judea anywhere near the time of Herod the Great or Herod Archelaus. But it took place 10 years after the death of Herod the Great. And so these two chronological anchors indicate that either one or both of these stories are fiction, are literary creations. It cannot be historical. Now, I am aware that there are tortured and strained apologetic attempts to cast doubt on these long-standing and overwhelming academic consensuses regarding when all these things took place. But if you look at those arguments, they rely on misinformation, and they are always arguments that it's not impossible that these things could be historical. They claim to be arguing that they have good reason for believing these things and that these things are plausible, but their arguments never quite reach that. And their arguments are never about what's the most likely interpretation of the historical data. As usual, these apologetic arguments are retreating to the insistence that it's not a contradiction unless you can prove to their satisfaction that it is logically and physically impossible for these things to all be true. But that's not scholarship. That's not trying to figure out what most likely happened, and that's certainly not taking the text seriously. It's just pure old-fashioned dogmatism. And the fit for this video has been the McFarlane Spider-Man.